Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 79 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending December 8th, 2017, the Fire and Ice edition. This week, Jay and I return for a wide-ranging discussion of some of the week's top compliance and ethics-related stories, including the sentencing of former VW Engineer Oliver Schmidt to 7 years in jail for his role in the VW emission testing scandal, UK Financial Regulatory Council's proposing changes to its governance code in the areas of corporate culture, diversity, and sustainable growth. We take a look at a very interesting situation where Transparency International criticized a company for using its corruption perception index in its compliance program. Very odd. We review a story about Caterpillar cheating its customers, tossing evidence into the ocean to hide it in its rail car repair subsidiary. We consider a question asked by Matthew Stephenson: is it time to amend U.S. domestic bribery statutes in light of the Supreme Court decision in McDonnel, based upon a blog post he had in the Global Anti-Corruption blog? Jay tells us about a visit with Andy Hinton, CCO at Global, and we highlight his podcast with Adam Turteltaub on compliance perspectives. We review 10 ways to get involved with the SCCE, an article by Roy Snell and Christy Grant Hart. We take a look at 3 very large whistleblower awards given out under the SEC Whistleblowers Program over the past week. And finally, we conclude with a discussion of my December edition of my 1 month to a more effective compliance program podcast series. In December, I am taking a look at written standards and a best practices compliance program. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for listening to This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back for another episode of This Week in FCPA, episode 79 for the week ending December 8th, 2017, the Fire and Ice edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Monitors, Jay Rosen, coming to us from smoky and gritty, and one might even say apocalyptic Los Angeles, California. Jay, tell us that you're safe.
We are safe. Unfortunately, the girls have been out of school for 3 out of 5 days this week, so that's been driving Mrs. Monitors crazy. And I'm actually right up in San Francisco. I shot in last night for a couple of events, but I have been keeping tabs on all the Rosen ladies, and they're doing fine.
Well, good. So, Jay, after last week, I would say a little bit less on the FCPA front this week. Nevertheless, lots of things in the greater corporate compliance world. So why don't we hop right into it with what I thought was just a stunning sentencing of former VW engineer Oliver Schmidt to 7 years in prison for his role in the VW emissions testing scandal. He was not an engineer who was involved in the actual execution of the scandal. He was a VW representative and unfortunately had the name or title of compliance professional, but he dealt with the U.S. regulators, and he was part of the conspiracy to deceive, really just to lie to U.S. regulators about VW's emission testing program, and that's the equivalent to the longest FCPA sentencing we've had. He was also assessed a criminal penalty of $400,000, and good luck ever paying that off. He's going to be deported when his sentence is completed in the United States. Although, frankly, I would not be surprised if he's not deported to Germany earlier. He's a German citizen. He spent some amount of time working for Volkswagen in the United States, and then he made the incredibly stupid decision last year to vacation at Walt Disney World from flying his family from Germany, and he was literally arrested at the Miami airport as he was getting ready to depart his family holiday. So if you subject yourself to physical U.S. jurisdiction, you are certainly subject to being arrested, and Mr. Schmidt was arrested. So it was really interesting. I thought a couple of things. One was the sentence. And we had a prior VW representative sentenced to 4 years, and I think that's what Schmidt was really expecting. Also, Schmidt had actually cooperated, giving voluntary statements to the Department of Justice prior to the time he was arrested. He made those statements in Europe. Nevertheless, we did have some cooperation, so I think people were a little bit surprised when he was arrested. And really, just the length of the sentence demonstrates that the court was very offended by his actions in lying to U.S. regulators. He, of course, claimed he was instructed to do so by VW management. He either didn't put forward evidence of that or was not persuasive to the court. And it sends a, I think, very clear signal from both the Department of Justice indicating that they will vigorously prosecute individuals who violate the law, but also the courts. And when you subject yourself to sentencing in front of a judge, you do that. You subject it. And if the court says, no, it's not the 4 years you think you've agreed on, it's 7 years because I find your conduct so offensive under U.S. law, that's what you potentially are looking at. So very interesting development. We've had, I think, 4 other VW executives have been indicted. They're German citizens living in Germany. They have not been extradited, nor do I expect them to be extradited to the United States, subject, of course, to their taking a holiday in Disney World. We've had one Italian who worked for Volkswagen has been indicted, and Italy does extradite to the United States, so he may actually stand trial here. German courts are moving at a laborious pace on this investigation. I would note that sort of unrelated to this, but tied certainly to Volkswagen, is Bill Coffin, the editor-in-chief at Compliance Week, has spent a fair amount of time interviewing high-level Volkswagen personnel around compliance, and he's going to come out with a series in Compliance Week on this, on their compliance response to the emissions testing scandal. So I think it'll be a nice supplement for those who are interested in the case. Once again, it will be from the compliance perspective, not really from the prosecutorial or enforcement perspective. So lots to talk about, lots still going on. And from my conversations with Bill, I know that he's got a lot to talk about on Volkswagen's compliance response to the scandal. So, like I said, just lots of information about Volkswagen in the news recently.
Great. I mean, it's just, I remember the first time when he had taken the trip to Disneyland, and you're just remarking at how it was such a bad decision. So I was going to add that in, but you beat me to it. Next up, we have something from the UK's Financial Regulatory Council, and they are proposing changes to the governance code. What do we know about that, Tom?
So the UK Financial Regulatory Council deals with banks and financial institutions in the United Kingdom, what we would call regulated industries here in the United States. And they have indicated they want some changes in code of conduct and corporate governance from these entities. And they have specified changes in the codes around corporate culture, diversity, and sustainable long-term growth. They have said that, let me get this right, they're seeking to shift the reporting on corporate governance from a comply or explain mode, which they feel is closer to a tick-the-box exercise, to one that focuses on applying the principles of the code to the organization and then explain how it's done so that it's easy for stakeholders to understand. They've come up with 5 different sections that I think are very interesting and something that we may need to unpack ourselves here in the United States around our approaches to code of conduct. But the 5 separate sections are, number 1, leadership and purpose. Number 2, division of responsibilities within the organization. 3, succession and evaluation. 4, audit, risk, and internal controls. And then 5, payment, or what they call our remuneration. And these principles of governance covering the code aim to ensure board effectiveness and to emphasize a corporate purpose that really transcends the bottom line. Another interesting point is that they are specifically requiring input from a variety of stakeholders that you and I, having worked for U.S. public companies, might find broader than simply the shareholders of the company, so that They want you to talk to your employees. They want you to talk to your third parties. And then the one I found the most interesting, they want you to talk to outsourced workers, recognizing in the gig economy, outsourcing of your workforce is a new reality. It's not the new reality, but it also requires strengthening of diversity on boards, not only gender balance, but perhaps age balance as well. And senior management to have that type of balance. So it's a very comprehensive reevaluation of what should go into corporate governance, what should be in a code of conduct, and how that all of that should be developed. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the United Kingdom. This is just a proposal at this point, and the consultation with industry, formal consultation allowing comments, is open until the end of February. But lots to think about, and really, when you and I talk about the types of things that affiliated monitors does in cultural assessment, in how they will try to unpack the company's values, code of conduct, I don't think, is really one of the top ways we do that. And this, I think, this proposed code reform really may get us to focus on the entire holistic approach with obviously your values flowing from your code, but enshrining more input from the disparate stakeholders of your company up to your code, and then having those values cascade down, and then where people like you and myself or and affiliated monitors might then go in and try to assess, is our culture really tying itself to what we say it is in the code of conduct? So I really thought there was a lot in here and a lot for us to think about, both at the very 30,000 foot level, but I really did think about it in terms of, how would we assess this? How would it play out? And how do we operationalize this? So an interesting development in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I think it really does provide, information for a very thoughtful approach to this. In the past, a lot of people or a lot of companies have had the issue where we've always talked about that, that paper code of conduct and that check the box approach, and going at this more from a 360 perspective. It's really not only important that there is a robust code of conduct and it provides a roadmap for what you should be doing as a corporation, but to your point, Tom, if we look at this holistically and from all the different people who are touched by the code, I think it really does give a better view into how those corporate values interact with the rest of the business community.
So next up, we had a really interesting article, Jay, about Transparency International. And I think probably almost everyone in the compliance community is aware of Transparency International, and certainly their annual Corruption Perception Index. But they have come out and criticized at least how one company is using it and perhaps how others are. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is something we've picked up from Henry Cutter over at the Wall Street Journal and the specific risk and compliance journal section. And basically, as you said, TI, Transparency International, they provide this index, and traditionally people have used it as an opportunity to maybe look at red flags. So if you are in a particularly low-ranking area, such as Brazil or Russia or somewhere in Africa, you should, as a company, if you're going to do business there, you should do heightened due diligence. And the issue at hand here is that the German software company SAP has said that they're choosing to use the TI index as a reason not to do business or not to work with certain people. So this has really kind of raised the ire of TI, because it seems to be going counter towards why they've developed the index, that they feel the index is developed to shine a light on areas that might need more attention, whereas SAP is using it for a much different purpose.
So I don't really know if this is something that you have either you've thought about in your roles as a service provider, but as far back as 2007, when I was employed at Able, we used a TI-CPI as a touch point, as a guidepost, and I don't think we said we wouldn't do business specifically. But now that I think about it, we may have even done that. So I think this has been going on for quite some time, and this is as well known a standard within the compliance space as any other standard. I think there are others that are now viewed as more comprehensive because they have more data points. But the TI-CPI is certainly the most senior, certainly the most recognized, and for them to put out a standard and then criticize people who choose to use that standard, I really found that a bit odd. Now, the use of the standard, you could criticize that as harsh. You could perhaps make other commentary, but if you're going to put out a standard, people are going to use it, and if a company chooses to use it in with a very conservative approach because of their own unique facts and circumstances, it's certainly a valid way to use the standard. So I'm a little bit confused by that. Have you really thought about it kind of in those terms, or I guess I should ask, have you used that in any of the places you've worked or worked with clients based on that?
I would say we do more of the using it as a data point, and as I said earlier, if we are training in a region that has has more of a heightened potential for corruption, we're going to specifically gear the training that way. So when I was out earlier this year and doing some training in Mexico, we, of course, were very highly attuned to the CPI index number there, and we appropriately, made additions to the to what we were training on to address that. So I think I support your contention, Tom, that if they've gone to the trouble of not only producing the index, but putting it out there as a guidepost for corporations to follow, I think each corporation, as you said, is going to have their own individual appetite for the amount of risk. And nobody's saying that I need to go, sell my wares in Russia or Equatorial Guinea. So I don't think TI can dictate how people use their data.
Especially when it's out there publicly available for free. So, Jay, we had a really interesting fraud case. I wouldn't say it's corruption and certainly not bribery, but I think it did spill over to the area of fraud involving Caterpillar. And Caterpillars just seem to have had a run of at least allegations of fraudulent activities, where this was a situation where Caterpillar unit was tasked with repairing rail cars at the, I believe, in Southern California, where they have a big port, and
Long Beach.
Long Beach. Thank you very much. And the Caterpillar unit there admitted it had cheated customers by performing unnecessary repairs to rail cars. And this was the part that I think got everybody's interest, which actually led to the conviction, was they actually destroyed parts on rail cars to claim that they needed repair. And then, too bad we don't have a snare drum and drum roll, they dumped those parts into Long Beach Harbor, which, of course, violated the Clean Harbor Act. And indeed, there was a whistleblower report on the dumping. So the U.S. Coast Guard actually sent divers, and they found the parts in Long Beach Harbor. So we had cheating customers by performing unnecessary repairs, dumping brake shoes and other parts into the ocean to hide it. The employees said they were encouraged, quote, end quote, to do so by supervisors so that they can increase revenue. And then, of course, the whistleblower made the report, and they sent out divers working for the port police who found the parts on the ocean floor. All of this conduct occurred back in 2008 and 2009, and apparently it was quite a complex case because it took, I guess that's 9 years to come to resolution through this plea agreement. Caterpillar disclosed in 2013 that it was the subject of a criminal investigation for improper, unnecessary inspections and repairs. This, of course, is in addition to the separate criminal probe where federal agents raided the former headquarters of Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois, in March of this year regarding a tax reduction plan. So lots of things going on with Caterpillar, but the the number of corporate scandals, Jay, we see where they're just cheating, and it's in following Mammon or the almighty dollar. I don't quite know or understand why this is so pervasive. If it's more pervasive now, if it's just more publicity about it now, but having supervisors encourage employees to actually break customers' parts so that they will need repair. This is in addition to making unneeded repairs for parts that didn't need them or damaging parts in some way rather than actually ripping them off rail cars. It's pretty serious. I think everyone would recognize that's unethical. And so you kind of wonder who was watching this unit.
Yeah, I mean, and if you just look at what we've talked about in the last 10 minutes, we have somebody at Volkswagen saying that management instructed them to cheat on the, on the admissions, and now you've got these workers at a unit of Caterpillar saying management asked them to, fake fake problems with machinery to correct them. So it seems that there's a lot of this this force coming down from management. And then if you want to, expand that even greater into something like, our good friend Wells Fargo keeps popping up in the news because there's more and more things that they are being asking their workforce to do in chasing the almighty dollar. So interesting stuff. Next up on our list, we have our good friend Matthew Stephenson, and he's wondering if it's time to amend U.S. bribery statutes. So what's on Matthew's mind?
So first, let me say, if you don't read the Global Anti-Corruption blog, you need to, and you need to read it every day, or at least take the headlines and read what's interesting, because it's one of the most thoughtful blogs by a law professor out there. He really gets into policy arguments. My favorite are actually when he goes into a kind of an open discussion with himself in writing, where he debates certain points, pro and con. But it's a great policy blog, and this one in Professor Stephenson really asks questions around, will there ever be another domestic bribery conviction under U.S. domestic law based upon the McDonnell case, who, of course, was the governor of Virginia, who was a recipient of over $150,000 worth of gifts and services, but that was determined not to be for a specific action, so that there was no quid pro quo. We recently had the hung jury in Senator Robert Menendez's case. We had a couple of verdicts overturned as a result of the McDonnell decision in New York. Legislators Dean Skelos and Sheldon Silver, and then, of course, the William Jefferson, former U.S. Congressman's verdict was overturned. These were not overturned on the substance, on the jury instructions. They may be retried, they may not be. It's unclear what the Department of Justice is going to do. And so Professor Stephenson asks what we can do at this point. He gives some suggestions on revising language on domestic anti-corruption statutes, recognizing, of course, the constitutional right to petition your representatives for redress. can't remember what article, but it's right there in the Constitution. So he wants to look at interpretation of statutory language and perhaps revise statutes along those lines. He recognizes the difficulty in this Congress, but he also states quite articulately that nobody wants bribes. And that's something that John Q. Citizen doesn't want, certainly something I don't want. And frankly, it's something that most legislatures and representatives don't want. So he advocates that we should really take a look at this and try to get some proposals in front of Congress and work towards revising things going forward.
Great. So now we're going to turn our attention to a couple things from SCCE. When we have our annual conference, Adam Turteltaub takes the opportunity where all of these ethics and compliance leaders are gathered to do some short little interviews. And this week, Adam is featuring an interview he did with Andy Hinton, who's working at Google, and which is also part of Alphabet. And Andy has just been really one of the fun educators in the ethics and compliance space. He is very approachable and down to earth, and he's always a good interview. So we've shared this in the show notes, and we feel you should take a look at it. And just again, to talk about Andy for a second, the reason why I was up here in San Francisco this week is BECA, the Bay Area Ethics and Compliance Association, had their annual holiday party, and it's part education and part, celebrating the holiday chair. So they had a CCO panel that was chaired by Len Shen at Visa, and on the panel were Andy Hinton from Google, Eamon Thoyer, who's the CCO of LinkedIn, and April Oliver, who's VP of Ethics and Integrity at Salesforce. So it was a real far-reaching discussion about things that they've noticed here in Silicon Valley, and then really they ran the gamut from offering ideas on how junior ethics and compliance people can get themselves noticed and to be more effective within their companies and grow. And they also shared a lot of their different war stories from being in the trenches. So thanks to Becca for hosting this event. And next thing we have SCC-wise is the top 10 ways to get involved with SCCE. And I hope those of you who are looking forward to participating in next fall's conference submitted your deadlines, your topics by deadline. They were due on November 30th. So I know I got mine in. Did you get yours in, Tom?
I submitted 10 this year.
Okay, so 10, is that normal for you, or is that a little bit less than normal?
No, it's a little bit more, but I decided not to take any chances. So I partnered up with 10 different people, and we submitted 10 different proposals, and hopefully one or more will be accepted.
All right. Well, I'm only at 30% of your output. I have 3 in, but I figure that'll do good. Anything else that this is a great short list on 10 ways to get involved with SCCE. Anything that you'd particularly like to talk about?
Well, Jay, you've talked a lot about your experiences at the conferences, both your speaking experiences, your experiences on the pre-conference events where we do mentoring and networking. And you've also talked about the volunteer work you do usually on the Saturday before. So I think those things that are covered in this, but I want to speak about a couple of other things, or several other things that both Christy, Grant Hart, and Roy talked about, which are how you can share content, you can refer colleagues, you can certainly get certified. But on your sharing of content, you can share on LinkedIn, you can share in groups, you can share on Twitter, you can do reviews of SCCE books and materials that are published on Amazon and other review-based website. You can provide feedback to SCCE sessions that you might attend. You can support the vendor relationships, and you can volunteer for leadership. So really within the whole panoply of personalities of SCCE members, there's a lot for everyone. If you're kind of an introvert and really don't want to speak, there's places for you to write. If you don't feel like you have anything independent to say, first of all, I would say you're wrong. But even if you feel that way, there are ways to share content. There are ways to support others who produce content. You can retweet Roy's stuff. You can retweet the article that we're talking about because we're going to give it the link in the show notes. You can read that article and see how you might work. It's the largest compliance and ethics organization in the world, and there's really a place for every compliance practitioner to get involved. And your involvement will make the organization stronger, more well-rounded, and give you the opportunity to be a part of not only the biggest organization, but also part of help us move forward into the 2020s. God, I can't believe I'm saying that, and really beyond. So I was really gratified that certainly they talked about the experiences at the conference, and you've really shared over the years your experiences there, but there are lots of other ways in addition to simply at the conferences. So I hope people will take a look at it. I hope they will consider getting involved. It's a great organization. Jay and I are both obviously big believers in it, and it's work for the profession. So, Jay, we had three more whistleblower awards over the last week. We're now over $175 million paid out by the SEC Office of Whistleblower to 49 whistleblowers. We had a $4.1 million award to an anonymous person, a former company insider who alerted the agency to an unnamed company's widespread fraud and corruption. So, although we don't know the name of the company, nor do we know the name of the whistleblower. I think it's significant that the SEC specifically highlighted the insider status, meaning this was senior management, general counsel, CFO, CCO, somebody who knew something was going on and wasn't able to stop it. The second one was two whistleblowers split $8 million each to help the SEC also bring in successful enforcement action. Once again, names of the whistleblowers and the company were redacted. It was a 20-page order that talked about the information provided. So lots of whistleblower awards. The $16 million was the largest in 2017 to date, but once again, over $175 million now to 49 whistleblowers. So that's whistleblower office and program has been a huge success for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I certainly expect it will move forward into 2018.
Well, we've got, we were talking before we went on air that Houston already had some snowfall, so it's got to be the holiday season there. And the fires have been raging all around Southern California. And typically in the wintertime, we have these very powerful Santa Ana winds. And, your tailpipe could be dragging on the freeway and it could set off a spark. And this is what Southern California has been dealing with. So it appears that none of us have really been spared this year. In the Southwest, you've had the floods and we've had the fires. But just remember, there is no global warning. But on behalf of my colleague, Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rose, and Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for spending some time with us for this week in the SCPA for the week ending December 8th, 2017. This has been episode 79. Thanks a lot and have a great weekend.
This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you've listened to this episode on iTunes, we would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only weekly podcast, all things FCPA compliance related. If you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. Thanks again for listening to this week's Fire and Ice edition. I hope you will join us next week for another episode of This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.